I never thought I'd be the kind of woman caught in a love triangle. Especially not one involving a ghost from my past and the man who helped me survive the darkest chapter of my life. My name is Sarah, and 10 years ago, my husband vanished into thin air, just gone. One Tuesday morning, Jake kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me, and walked out the door to grab coffee before work. He never came back. His car was found abandoned at a gas station 3 towns over. His wallet, his phone, everything was inside. But Jake, it was like he'd evaporated. The police investigated for months. They dragged lakes. They searched woods. They questioned everyone we knew. His parents hired private investigators who burned through their retirement savings chasing leads that went nowhere. And me? I was 7 months pregnant, watching my entire world crumble while this tiny life grew inside me. Girls, can you even imagine? One day you're planning nursery colors with your husband, and the next, you're being asked if he had any enemies, if your marriage was troubled, if he might have wanted to disappear. The whispers started almost immediately. People love to speculate, don't they? Some said he ran off with another woman. Others thought he got mixed up with the wrong people, gambling debts maybe. The cruelest ones suggested he couldn't handle becoming a father and just bolted, but I knew Jake. Or at least I thought I did. He was excited about the baby. We tried for 2 years to get pregnant. When that test finally showed 2 lines, he literally cried. This wasn't a man running from fatherhood. This was a man who'd already painted the nursery and assembled the crib at 6 months because he was too excited to wait. So where the hell was he? 2 months after he disappeared, I gave birth to our son alone. Well, not completely alone. Jake's best friend Marcus was there. He'd been there for everything, actually. Every doctor's appointment Jake missed. Every 2 a.m. panic attack when I couldn't breathe thinking about raising a child by myself. Every interaction with the police that left me shattered. Marcus had been Jake's friend since college. They were like brothers. When Jake vanished, Marcus was investigated too, obviously. But he had an airtight alibi and cooperated completely. More than that, he was as devastated as I was. I'd see him sometimes, just staring at Jake's empty chair at the bar where we all used to hang out, this look of absolute loss on his face. After my son was born, I named him Dylan. Jake and I had chosen the name together. Marcus was the first person to hold him after me, and when he looked down at this tiny baby who would never know his father, tears just streamed down his face. He said, "I promise you, little man, I'll make sure you know what an incredible guy your dad was." The first year was survival mode. I was drowning in grief, postpartum depression, and the logistics of single motherhood. Marcus showed up every single day. He brought groceries. He held Dylan when I needed to shower. He sat with me in silence when I couldn't talk and listened for hours when the words wouldn't stop coming. Somewhere in year 2, I realized I was smiling again. Laughing, even. Dylan took his first steps, and Marcus was there to see it. Dylan's first word was mama, but his second was Mark. People started assuming we were together. At the grocery store, at the pediatrician's office, at the park. "Your husband is so good with him," strangers would say, watching Marcus push Dylan on the swings. We'd correct them at first, but it got exhausting. And honestly, sometimes I'd catch myself wishing it were true. Was that terrible? My husband had been gone for 2 years, declared legally dead after 7, and I was developing feelings for his best friend. The guilt ate me alive. But Marcus, he was patient. He never pushed. Never made me feel like I owed him anything despite everything he'd done for us. It was year 3 when he finally said something. We were sitting on my back porch after putting Dylan to bed, just talking like we did most evenings. And out of nowhere, he said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know I don't expect anything from you." My heart was pounding. I knew what was coming. He said, "I'm in love with you. I have been for a while now, and I love Dylan like he's my own son. I know this is complicated. I know Jake was my best friend, and I miss him every single day. But I can't keep pretending what I feel for you is just friendship anymore." When he said that, everything inside me just cracked open, because I felt it too. This wasn't just gratitude or convenience. I was in love with Marcus. I started crying, and he immediately backtracked, apologizing, saying he shouldn't have said anything. But I stopped him. I said, "I love you too, and that terrifies me." We sat there for hours, talking through every complicated emotion. The guilt, the fear of what people would think, the question of whether we were betraying Jake's memory. But we also talked about Dylan, about the life we'd already built together without even meaning to, about the fact that we couldn't control our hearts. We took it slow. Didn't tell anyone for months, but eventually we stopped hiding. Dylan was 4 when Marcus officially moved in. He was 6 when we got married, Some people were supportive. Others were horrified. Jake's parents stopped speaking to me entirely. They saw it as the ultimate betrayal. At the funeral we'd held with an empty casket, they'd embraced Marcus, thanked him for taking care of me. But when we got engaged, his mother called me a whore who'd probably been sleeping with Marcus all along. Said maybe that's why Jake really left. That hurt. God, that hurt. But I had to move forward. I had a son to raise and a man who loved us both unconditionally. Dylan grew up calling Marcus dad. We told him about Jake, of course, showed him pictures, told him stories. But Marcus was the one who taught him to ride a bike, who coached his little league team, who scared away the monsters under his bed. Marcus was his father in every way that mattered. Life went on. We had good years. Marcus adopted Dylan legally when he was 8. We tried for another baby, but it didn't happen, and that was okay. We were happy. The three of us were a family, 10 years. A full decade passed. Dylan was 12 years old, starting middle school, playing basketball. Obsessed with video games and avoiding vegetables. A normal kid with a normal life. And then, on a random Thursday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I was making dinner. Marcus was at work. Dylan was at practice. I opened the door expecting a delivery or maybe a neighbor. Instead, I saw a ghost. Jake was standing on my front porch holder. Thinner. A beard I'd never seen on him before, but unmistakably, undeniably Jake. Those same green eyes. That scar on his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, my vision actually blurred. I thought I was hallucinating, having a stroke maybe. Because this wasn't possible. This man was dead. We'd had a funeral. There was a death certificate. I'd grieved. I'd moved on. I'd remarried, he said, Sarah, just my name. But hearing his voice after 10 years made my knees buckle. I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. My mind was just screaming static. He said, I know this is a shock. I know you probably hate me, but I can explain. Please, can I come in? Can he come in? This man who disappeared from my life, who left me pregnant and alone, who I mourned for years, just shows up and asks to come in like he's been on a business trip. I found my voice and it came out as a whisper. You're dead, he shook his head. I'm not, I'm here, I'm alive, and I've been trying to get back to you for 10 years. My blood went cold. Trying. You've been gone for a decade, Jake. Where the hell have you been? Neighbors were starting to notice. Mrs. Patterson across the street was definitely staring. I didn't want this conversation on my front porch, so I let him in. Not because I wanted to, because I was in shock and running on autopilot. He stepped into the house he used to live in, the house we'd bought together. Except now it was completely different. Different furniture. Different paint colors. Photos on the wall of me, Marcus, and Dylan. A family he wasn't part of. I watched him take it all in. Saw his eyes land on our wedding photo. Me in a cream dress, Marcus in a gray suit, Dylan between us with the biggest smile. Jake's face went white. You were married. The accusation in his tone snapped me out of my shock and straight into rage. I said, you were dead, Jake, legally dead. What the hell did you expect me to do? Wait forever for a man who vanished without a trace? He turned to me, and there were tears in his eyes. I didn't vanish by choice, Sarah. I was taken. Taken? What kind of movie plot was this? I said. Explain, right now, or I'm calling the police. And so he told me this absolutely insane story. He said that the morning he disappeared, he'd been grabbed in the parking lot of that gas station. Thrown into a van, drugged. When he woke up, he was in some kind of compound with about 20 other people. A cult. He'd been kidnapped by a cult. They'd taken his identity. Told him his old life was over. Kept him isolated on this property in rural Montana. No phones, no internet, no contact with the outside world. He said he tried to escape multiple times in the first year. They caught him every time. Punished him. Kept him under constant surveillance. I just stared at him. Because what do you even say to that? He said, I never stopped thinking about you, about our baby. I didn't even know if you'd had a boy or a girl. I tried to escape so many times, Sarah. But they were always watching. And then after a few years, they moved some of us to a different location. That's when I finally saw an opportunity. He'd escaped 8 months ago, made it to a town, but he had no ID, no money, no proof of who he was. He'd been declared dead. It took him months to navigate the legal system, to prove his identity, to get documentation. He'd been working with lawyers and federal investigators because apparently this cult was under investigation for multiple kidnappings. He said, the moment I could, I came here, I came home. My mind was reeling. If this was true, if he'd really been kidnapped and held against his will, then he was a victim. He hadn't abandoned me. He hadn't chosen to leave. But also, 10 years of my life had passed. I'd built a new life. I had a husband. Dylan had a father. I said, Jake, I don't even know what to say. If what you're telling me is true, then I'm so sorry for what happened to you. That's horrific. But you can't just come back and expect everything to be the same. He stepped closer to me. Sarah, we're still married. Legally, I checked with my lawyer, the death certificate can be voided now that I'm alive. Your marriage to whoever that is, it's not valid. My heart stopped. What? He said. You can't be married to two people. Our marriage never ended. We never divorced. That means your second marriage is null and void. Oh my God, I said. His name is Marcus, your best friend Marcus, and he's been more of a husband to me than you ever had the chance to be. That was cruel. I knew it was cruel even as I said it, but I was panicking. Jake looked like I'd slapped him. Marcus, you married Marcus? The front door opened. Dylan came home from practice, sweaty and loud, yelling, Mom, I'm starving. Can we have pizza? He stopped dead when he saw Jake standing in our living room. Dylan said, Mom, who's this? I looked at my son. My 12-year-old son who had no idea his entire world was about to implode. And I looked at Jake, this stranger who was also my husband, also this boy's biological father. What was I supposed to say? How do you explain this? Jake was staring at Dylan with this expression of absolute wonder and devastation. He said, You're Dylan. Dylan looked at me, confused and a little wary. Yeah, how do you know my name? I couldn't speak. My throat was completely closed. Jake said, I'm your father. Dylan laughed, actually laughed. My dad's at work, dude. Who are you really? Oh God, this was a nightmare. I said, Dylan, go to your room, please. He protested. But Mom. Now, Dylan, he'd never heard that tone from me before. He grabbed his backpack and went upstairs, looking back at us with wide, scared eyes. The second his door closed, I turned on Jake. You can't just drop that on him. He doesn't know you. Marcus is his father. Jake said, Marcus is not his father. I'm his biological father and I'm your husband, Sarah. I know this is complicated, but we can work through this. We're a family. A family? We weren't a family. We were a tragedy, a ghost story, a legal nightmare. I said, you need to leave, right now. I need to think. I need to talk to Marcus. You can't just show up and blow up my entire life. He said, this is my life too. That's my son. This is my house. This hasn't been your house for 10 years. We were yelling now. Upstairs, I could hear Dylan's door crack open. He was listening. Jake said, I'm not leaving. I've spent 10 years trying to get back to my family. I'm not walking away now. The garage door opened. Marcus was home early. I felt like I was going to throw up. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. Marcus walked in through the kitchen, calling out, Hey babe, they let us out early because... He stopped when he saw Jake. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed, Marcus said. Jake? His voice was barely a whisper. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Which I guess he had. Jake said, Hey brother. The way he said brother was loaded with something dark. Accusation, maybe. Betrayal. Marcus looked at me, then back at Jake, then at me again. How is this possible? You're dead. We buried you. Well, we had a funeral. How are you standing here? Jake explained the whole thing again. The kidnapping, the cult, the escape. And with every word, I watched Marcus's face cycle through shock, disbelief, horror, and then something else. Fear, because he understood the implications immediately. When Jake finished, Marcus said, That's insane. I'm so sorry that happened to you, man. That's horrific. Jake said, Yeah, well, I survived, and now I'm back. Back to my wife and my son. The emphasis on my was deliberate. Possessive. Marcus straightened up. Sarah is my wife. Actually, legally, she's mine. I said, Stop it, both of you, I'm not a piece of property to fight over, but they weren't listening to me. They were staring at each other with this intensity that made the air feel electric. Marcus said, You've been gone for 10 years. Sarah thought you were dead. We all did. She grieved you. She moved on. You can't just come back and expect. Jake cut him off. Expect what? Expect my wife to still be my wife? Expect my son to know who his real father is? Yeah, Marcus, I do expect that. Marcus's jaw clenched. I've raised that boy since he was born. I've been there for every scraped knee, every parent-teacher conference, every birthday. Me, where were you? I was being held captive by a cult. You think I wanted to miss all that? You think I chose this? No, but you can't just waltz back in and pretend the last 10 years didn't happen. Dylan's door opened upstairs. He came down slowly, looking between all of us with tears in his eyes. He said, Mom, what's going on? Who is this guy? I went to him, but Jake moved faster. He said, Dylan, I know this is confusing, but I'm your biological father. Your mom and I were married when you were born. I didn't leave you by choice. I was taken. But I'm back now, and I want to get to know you. Dylan looked at him, then at Marcus, then at me. Is he telling the truth? I nodded, crying. Yes, baby, this is Jake. He was my husband before Marcus. And yes, he's your biological father. But he didn't abandon us. He was taken. We thought he was dead. Dylan said, but Dad is my dad. He was looking at Marcus. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. I am, buddy, I always will be. Jake said, Dylan, I understand you have a relationship with Marcus, but I'm your real father, and now that I'm back, we can be a real family again. Dylan's face crumpled. I already have a real family. He ran back upstairs and slammed his door. The three of us stood there in the wreckage of the moment. I said, Jake, you need to leave. This is too much. We need time to process this. He said, I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. I've already talked to a lawyer. I have rights. Parental rights. Marital rights. I can file to have your marriage to Marcus annulled. I can fight for custody of Dylan. Marcus said, You wouldn't dare. Watch me. That's my son, and that's my wife. I don't care how long I've been gone. You had no right to step into my life. Marcus actually laughed, but it was bitter. Your life? You didn't have a life, Jake. You were gone. Sarah was alone and pregnant and terrified. I was there for her. I held her when she cried. I raised your son. I love them. You think you can just erase all that? Jake said. I think you took advantage of a vulnerable woman and stole my family. Marcus lunged at him. I screamed. They crashed into the coffee table, grappling, throwing punches. I was yelling at them to stop, and Dylan was crying upstairs, and everything was chaos. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The police came. Separated them. Took statements. Jake showed them his documentation proving who he was. The officers looked at me with this mixture of pity and fascination. One of them said, Ma'am, you're going to need a lawyer. This is way above our pay grade. They made Jake leave but couldn't arrest him because technically he hadn't done anything illegal. He was just a man returning to his own house. Except it wasn't his house anymore. It was mine and Marcus's. After they left, Marcus and I sat in silence. Dylan was still locked in his room. Marcus said, What are we going to do? I said, I don't know anything anymore. He took my hand. Do you still love me? Of course I do. But he's your husband, legally. You're my husband in every way that matters. He said, That might not be enough, Sarah. If what he's saying is true, our marriage might not be legal, and he could fight for custody of Dylan. I started crying. This can't be happening. How is this my life? The next few weeks were absolute hell. Jake got a lawyer. A good one. He filed to have my marriage to Marcus declared void. He filed for joint custody of Dylan. He started showing up at Dylan's basketball games at his school. Just appearing in our lives like he'd never left. Dylan was confused and angry. He didn't want anything to do with Jake, would barely speak to him. But Jake was persistent. He'd bring gifts, try to talk about sports, attempt to bond. It was painful to watch. Marcus was a wreck. The man who'd been so steady, so strong for me all these years was falling apart. He'd wake up in the middle of the night panicking. He'd look at me like he was afraid I'd disappear, and me, I was drowning. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I felt about Jake anymore. Part of me was furious. Even though he'd been kidnapped, even though it wasn't his fault, I was angry. Angry that he came back. Angry that he was destroying the life I'd built. Angry that he expected everything to just go back to the way it was. But another part of me felt this overwhelming guilt and grief. This man had been stolen from his life. He'd missed everything. The birth of his son. Dylan's first steps, first words, first day of school. He'd been held captive, probably tortured, definitely traumatized. And now he was back to find his wife remarried to his best friend and his son calling another man dad. How was I supposed to navigate this? The legal situation was a nightmare. Turns out, when someone declared dead comes back to life, it creates this massive legal gray area. My lawyer said that yes, technically my marriage to Jake never ended, which meant my marriage to Marcus might not be valid. But there were arguments to be made about good faith, about the unique circumstances. It would have to go to court. The custody battle was even worse. Jake had biological rights, but Marcus had been Dylan's father for 12 years. There was precedent for step-parent rights, especially in cases like this. But again, it would have to be decided by a judge. Everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, was being decided by strangers in a courtroom. Jake's parents came back into the picture. They were overjoyed their son was alive, and they immediately sided with him. Started pushing for us to work things out, for me to leave Marcus, for Dylan to know his real father. They looked at me like I was a traitor. My own parents were supportive of me and Marcus, but even they were conflicted. They'd loved Jake too. They were glad he was alive, but they'd also watched Marcus step up and be there for me. They didn't know what the right thing was either. Friends took sides. Some thought I should give Jake a chance, that he deserved that after what he'd been through. Others thought he was being selfish, that he should accept that too much time had passed. Our whole social circle fractured, and through it all, Dylan was suffering the most. He started acting out at school. His grades dropped. He got into fights. One night he screamed at me, "Why did he have to come back? Everything was fine before." How do you answer that? How do you tell your child that sometimes life just implodes and there's nothing you can do about it? I tried to talk to Jake, to reason with him. I said, can't we find some middle ground here? You can be part of Dylan's life without destroying everything. He said, middle ground? Sarah, you're my wife. Dylan is my son. There is no middle ground. I want my family back. I said, but I'm not that person anymore, Jake. I'm not the woman you left 10 years ago. I've changed. I've grown. I've lived an entire life without you. He said, not by choice. I didn't choose to leave. Doesn't that matter? Of course it matters. But it doesn't change the reality of where we are now. He grabbed my hands. Sarah, I still love you. I never stopped. Every day in that place, thinking about you and our baby was what kept me alive. You can't tell me that means nothing. And that's when it got really complicated. Because when he said that, when I looked into his eyes and saw the pain there, I felt something. Not love exactly, but something, grief maybe, for what we'd lost. For what could have been, but I loved Marcus. I was in love with Marcus. He was my partner, my best friend, my husband. The man I wanted to grow old with. I pulled my hands away. Jake, I'm sorry for what happened to you. I truly am, but I love Marcus. I'm building a life with him. You can be part of Dylan's life, but you can't expect me to just erase the last 10 years and come back to you. His face hardened. Then I guess we'll let the courts decide. The custody hearing was brutal. Jake's lawyer painted Marcus as an opportunist who'd swooped in and stolen another man's family. Brought up how quickly we'd gotten together after Jake disappeared. Implied there might have been something between us even before. That killed me. Because it wasn't true. Marcus and I had been nothing but friends while Jake was around. The feelings came later, born out of shared grief and proximity and time, but the lawyer made it sound sordid. Made it sound like we'd been waiting for Jake to get out of the way. Our lawyer argued that Marcus had been Dylan's father in every meaningful way for 12 years, that disrupting that relationship would be harmful to Dylan. That Jake, while having biological rights, was essentially a stranger to his son. They put Dylan on the stand, asked him who he considered his father. He said, Marcus, without hesitation. I watched Jake's face crumble. And despite everything, my heart broke for him. The judge ruled for joint custody. Jake would get Dylan every other weekend and one night a week. Marcus's parental rights were maintained. The judge said that while the situation was unprecedented, the priority had to be Dylan's well-being, and that meant maintaining his relationship with the man who'd raised him while also allowing him to build a relationship with his biological father. Jake was furious. He'd wanted primary custody, wanted to make up for lost time, but the judge had been clear. You can't force a relationship. Dylan needed time. The marriage situation was even messier. The judge ruled that my marriage to Marcus was entered into in good faith, believing Jake was deceased. However, technically, my marriage to Jake had never been dissolved. The solution? I had to choose. I had to legally divorce one of them. If I divorced Jake, Marcus and I could stay married, and Jake would remain in Dylan's life as a co-parent. If I divorced Marcus, Jake and I would still be married, and Marcus would be. What? Just Dylan's stepdad. With no legal rights? The judge gave me 30 days to decide, 30 days to choose between the man I'd loved first and the man I loved now. Jake started his visitation with Dylan. It was awkward and painful. Dylan was resistant, would barely talk. Jake tried so hard, but you can't force 12 years of relationship into a few hours a week. One weekend, Jake took Dylan to a baseball game. Dylan came home and actually seemed okay. Said Jake was not terrible. It was the first positive thing he'd said, and I saw hope flicker in Jake's eyes when I told him, maybe this could work. Maybe we could find a way to co-parent, to both be in Dylan's life without destroying each other. But then Jake started pushing again. Started talking about how if we were a real family, it would be easier for Dylan. How Dylan needed his parents together. How we owed it to him to try. Marcus heard him say this one time when he was dropping Dylan off. He lost it. He said, you don't get to manipulate her like that. You don't get to use Dylan as a weapon. Jake said, I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm fighting for my family. We're not your family anymore. Says who? The courts say Sarah is still my wife. I stepped between them. Stop, both of you. I'm not a prize to be won. And Dylan is not a pawn in whatever game you two are playing. But that's exactly what it felt like. A game, a fight. And I was being torn in half. I talked to Dylan. Asked him what he wanted. He said, I want things to go back to normal. I want Jake to go away. I said, baby, he's your father. He loves you. Dylan said, Dad loves me. Marcus is my dad. Jake is just some guy who shares my DNA. Kids are brutal in their honesty. I talked to a therapist. She said I needed to follow my heart but also consider the practical implications. Who did I want to spend my life with? Who made me happy? What kind of future did I envision? When I thought about my future, I saw Marcus. I saw us growing old together. Saw Dylan graduating high school with both Marcus and Jake there, having found some kind of peace. Saw holidays that were complicated but filled with love. I couldn't see a future with Jake. Too much had changed. I wasn't the woman he'd married. He wasn't the man I'd married. We were strangers bound by history and DNA. I made my decision. I filed for divorce from Jake. When I told him, he looked at me like I'd killed him all over again. He said, "How can you do this? After everything I went through to get back to you?" I said, "Jake, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you missed so much, but I can't give you what you want. I can't go back in time. I love Marcus. He's my husband. He's my future." Jake said, "What about Dylan? He deserves to have his real parents together. His real parents are me and Marcus. You're his biological father and you'll always be part of his life. But Marcus raised him. Marcus is his dad." Jake's face twisted with anger. "You're being selfish. You're choosing your own happiness over your son's well-being?" That hit me like a punch. "Don't you dare. I have done nothing but put Dylan first since the day he was born. This decision is about giving him stability, not disrupting his entire life because you want to play house." He said, "I'll fight this. I'll appeal." "Jake, stop, please. You're only making this harder on everyone, especially Dylan." He left. Didn't say goodbye, just walked out. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. My marriage to Marcus was legally recognized. Jake's visitation continued, and slowly, painfully, he and Dylan started to build something. Not a father-son relationship exactly, but something. Dylan started calling him Jake instead of that guy. Started occasionally asking if he could call him instead of waiting for scheduled visits. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Jake started therapy, started processing his trauma, started slowly accepting that the life he'd left behind was gone. He began dating someone about a year later. A nice woman named Rebecca who was patient with his baggage. I was genuinely happy for him. Marcus and I renewed our vows, had a small ceremony with just close family and friends. Dylan walked me down the aisle. It was perfect. But here's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this: they're never really resolved. There's no neat ending. No moment where everything is suddenly okay. Dylan is 15 now. He has a relationship with Jake, calls him on Father's Day actually, sends him birthday texts. They're not close, but they're connected. And he still calls Marcus Dad without hesitation. Jake and I are civil. We co-parent. We show up to Dylan's events and sit on opposite sides but wave to each other. It's cordial, sometimes it's even friendly, but there are still hard days. Days when I see Jake look at Marcus with this flash of resentment. Days when Dylan seems sad about the whole situation. Days when I wonder if I made the right choice. Marcus still wakes up sometimes, reaches for me in the dark, and whispers, "You're still here, right? You're not leaving?" And I tell him what I've told him 100 times. "I'm not going anywhere. You're my husband. You're my person. I choose you." 'Cause that's what it came down to, choice. Jake didn't choose to leave. That was taken from him, but I chose Marcus. Every day I choose him, and that has to be enough. Sometimes I think about alternate universes. Ones where Jake never got taken, where we raised Dylan together, where Marcus remained just a friend. Would I have been happy? Probably. We were good together, Jake and I, but I'm happy now, with Marcus. With the life we've built from the ashes of tragedy, and Jake, he's building a new life too. It's not the one he wanted, not the one he fought for, but it's his. Dylan asked me once if I ever regretted marrying Marcus. If I wished Jake had never come back, I told him the truth. I don't regret loving Marcus, but I wish Jake hadn't suffered. I wish he'd been there for you growing up. I wish this whole situation didn't have to hurt so many people. He said, "But if you had to choose again, would you still choose Dad?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, every time. Because love isn't just about history or biology or legal documents. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses you back. Jake was my first love, the father of my child. A good man who suffered an unimaginable tragedy, but Marcus is my husband, my partner, my home, and in the end, that's the choice I had to make, not the easy one, not the one that made everyone happy, but the one that was true. Girls, if you're ever in an impossible situation, remember this: you can honor the past while choosing the future. You can be grateful for what was while fighting for what is. You can love someone and still let them go. It's messy. It's painful. It's complicated, but it's life. And sometimes life doesn't give you good options. It just gives you choices. And you have to make them, live with them, and find a way to move forward. That's what I did. That's what we're all still doing. moving forward, one complicated day at a time.